And people when the Liberals or whoever comes out and says that they can fix economic inequality, that's like a huge red flag to me. Like, no, you can't. Who do you think is going to be paying the increased taxes for this? The middle class, right? And then the rich will get richer because that money's going to find its way into assets like real estate.
All right. So on today's podcast, we are going to be talking about how Doug Ford is f***ing everything up.
Yeah. Great talk. Like what world are we in right now?
I know. This is crazy. So Doug Ford and Ontario, the Liberal government.
Powers that be.
Yeah. So I actually responded to a comment today on a house for rent on Facebook. And the person said, actually, I don't even know if I can find it.
What's the gist of it?
So yeah, I'll explain like what it. Let me give you the gist of it. So, the context was, it was a smaller home. I think it was like maybe a 2 or 3 bed home. I don't even remember. It was smaller, right? And they're asking like $1,800 or $2,000 a month in rent, and everybody's like, "Fuck, scam! You're gonna go to hell! Like you're fucking ripping everybody off. This yada 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 yada." And I wrote back. And this person actually was like, this particular person that I responded to or replied to, she said, "You're the reason," meaning the landlord, "you're the reason why there's so many homeless people in Windsor right now."
Yeah, definitely.
So then I responded, "Actually, no. It's our Liberal government and their policies that's creating this housing market. It's not the landlords."
Of course.
Yeah. So we're going to get into why it's actually happening.
People have a misconception that these socialist policies and just giving everybody money and even the universal basic income that's on the table, that's a good thing for people that are poor and at the low end of the spectrum. It's actually the opposite. It actually, in my opinion, is going to make the rich even richer.
Yeah.
Because that money is going to find its way into assets, and it's going to find its way to Amazon and Walmart and McDonald's, and it's going to inflate prices of everything. And eventually those poor people, even though they're getting a handout, they're going to end up even poorer, and that gap is going to go even wider.
And they're going to, again, it's simple inflation. You think that, you're on the lower end of the spectrum here in terms of earnings. When all of this stuff starts coming to fruition, it's already happening, number one. And we're going to get into the housing market and how it's happening already now. Like, I think it's hilarious when I see these reports coming out and they're like, "Oh, inflation isn't necessarily a concern yet." Are you kidding me right now? So what's actually happening is, when you see inflation, the way that what we're talking about, where people are going to start getting handouts on the lower end of the spectrum of earnings.
It's coming.
What do you think is going to happen to the price we pay for things?
Yeah,
going to.
What happened when they raised the minimum wage to $15 overtime in Ontario? What happened to the price of your hamburger?
Oh, it doubled.
It doubled.
Yeah,
right?
it doubled.
So what happened to the price of real estate? Right,
Doubled.
Because now people have more affordability, and it just drives prices up over time.
Yep.
Now, what ends up happening to the wealth gap when you give people at the low end of the spectrum money is the wealth gap gets wider. And people when the Liberals or whoever comes out and says that they can fix economic inequality, that's like a huge red flag to me. Like, no, you can't.
Can't do it.
The government isn't good at anything.
They're pandering. That's
They're
it.
pandering.
They're pandering to the people on the lower end of the spectrum, and they're eating it up.
They manipulate them.
They
and those people
them.
at the lower end of the spectrum, or even the middle class, who foot the bill, by the way.
Yeah, and by the way, I even add to that, it's the middle class that's getting the most.
Oh, big time.
By far.
Big time.
By
big time.
far.
Yeah.
So just when you think the government's the government doesn't
Here's the government's number one goal: to get reelected and stay in power.
Yeah.
And they're going to pander to who they need to pander to. They're going to create whatever platform they need to create to stay in power. And generally speaking, that is pandering to the middle class and the poor, right? And the point here is that, they're falling for it.
I know.
And you're the one, who do you think is going to be paying the increased taxes for this? The middle class, right?
Middle class
you can't
all day
tax
long.
corporations.
No.
You can't tax somebody that has 3 shelter corporations and whatever else, right? So the burden will fall onto the middle class. And then the rich will get richer because that money's going to find its way into assets like real estate.
And another point too, the wealthier people have the ability to pivot and they have the ability to move. And
the capacity, the mental, emotional, and financial capacity that you've developed as being an entrepreneur for years, whatever the market gives you, you're going to be able to take advantage of it, right? And the poor and middle class that are just living their lives and don't really have either the enterprising mentality to do that or they don't want to, which is fine. That's fine. But they're the ones that are going to be absolutely smashed. That's a good point.
Oh, for
That's
sure.
a really good point.
Our government is coming after the middle class.
But they're doing it under the guise of the opposite, coming after the rich.
Exactly.
And that's why it sells.
And it's not the case.
That's why it sells.
Yeah, it's not the case. Yeah, exactly.
Trigger.